Hi, Web Design 1 class. It's Mrs. Miskin. I'm going to be going over the Science Club CSS practice page today. Again, just like the other ones that we've covered, if you need to pause or stop so that you can do your code, that's totally fine. And I will be showing you code samples from my code, and I'll screen share those a little bit later. So first of all, this is the Science Club practice page. So let's kind of just go over what makes it up. We've got a couple of bars at the top, different colors, and then some text that's centered here in the top. That's our navigation and title of our page, or the main heading, I should say, not the title. Then I've got a picture, I've got another paragraph, some groups of pictures and headings, and then some list over here on the side. Then we've got a footer down at the bottom. Now on Schoology, you do have a copy of this screenshot, so you can look at it closer if you need to on your computer. I'm going to go ahead and screen share the page on Schoology so you can see what files need to be downloaded. Now, just like the frozen yogurt one that we did earlier, you will need to create a new folder in your web design folder that's called Science Club, so that these stay separate from the other images and things that we're doing. So I'm just going to go ahead and screen share so that you can see what you need to get on Schoology. All right, so right here, the first one on the left, that's the screenshot. Have a background image that we're going to be using instead of just a set color. Then we've got the bigger image right here in the middle. And remember, you need to click on it and then hit the download image link and save it into that folder. So take just a minute, and in File Explorer, in your web design folder, so navigate there, and then create a new folder called Science Club. And then you'll save these images into it. You can optionally, this is up to you, if you want to create an images folder inside of the Science Club folder, you can do that. Otherwise, it's okay to just keep them all in the same one, because we're only going to have these images and then your HTML file and your CSS file. So you won't have a lot of files. The organization needs are not quite as bad with this one. So you can keep them all in the same one if you want to. Make sure you download these and get them into that folder. And then I do have several different colors here. And I just have specified serif font, and I did copy the text of that one bigger paragraph. The headings and the unordered list you will need to copy in, or type in, I should say, but that one big paragraph I have copied up here, so you can just copy and paste it. Okay, we're going to go back to our page here and start deconstructing HTML. So first of all, open up brackets, create a new file, and call it scienceclub.html. Make sure there's no spaces, otherwise you might have some issues later on. And call it scienceclub.html. Put in all of the required tags first. So doc type, open and close HTML, open and close head, open and close body. All right, now that you have that skeleton done, let's go ahead and break down what pieces go into the body of this page. Side note, if you want to add a title in the head, you can go ahead and do that. You can also create a link to your CSS file if you want to create your CSS file now. That's fine. Otherwise, we'll do it at the end of our HTML. Okay, so first of all, everything in here goes inside body. And let's look at this piece right up here. We have two different colored bars. They go 100% of the width of the screen. And then we've got these parts right here with the text inside of them that you can see are centered in the middle, or at least centered with the rest of this page. They're aligned with that big picture. Even if the elements themselves are not centered, like you can see that this is left aligned, but it is left aligned right here. So let me break down a little bit how we're going to do this. We're first of all going to have, we're going to put this inside of a header, okay? And we're going to give that header this background color, and it's just white. So we'll get to that in a minute, but I'm just going to kind of walk through how we'll do this later so it makes a little bit more sense. The header will have a background of white for this color. Now the purple, that hex code is on Schoology. We'll get to that a little bit later. What I'd like you to do is then put a nav tag inside of the header. What we'll do for that is then give the nav 100% width and give it the purple background. Now inside of the nav, we know that we have an unordered list with list items. So when we get to styling, we'll make the unordered list a line there in the center so that we get this overall look. I'm not doing this to just be really difficult, but there's lots of different ways that you can style things inside of containers, giving them background colors and things just to get a different look. Now, if this was just cut off, it might look a little bit awkward. Wouldn't be balanced if we've got this footer at the bottom, and then it doesn't set apart the middle like it normally would. So lots of different ways that you can design it when you get to your final project. Certainly, you'll have so many different options for how you design everything. Okay, so take a minute. You'll have a header and then a nav, and then inside of the nav, an unordered list. And then you have 6 list items. So go ahead and pause the video and add in those elements to your HTML page. Okay, let's go back to this header. One more thing that I forgot, this one right here. So we got to the UL, sorry. Then we're gonna go down underneath the UL. We'll finish off the header here. Right here, we're gonna do a similar thing to what we did on the first line. Now, we put a nav outside of the UL so that we could have a purple background. Nav is appropriate for the UL because they're navigation links. Right here, I just wanna have this portion right here set apart. And I don't want to try and guess what that margin on the left is going to be or anything like that. I just want it to center with the rest of the page and always be in alignment with this. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in a div. So underneath the nav, inside of the header, put a div. Now this is the main heading for our page, obviously because it's a home page. So we're going to use an H1. So take just a second and put a div underneath the, after you close the nav, inside of the header still, add a div inside of the div, put an H1, and then add that text. Okay, moving on, down below, we know that we've got a header and a main and a footer. So let's go ahead and add this main, and that will go after you close header. So open and close the main. First of all, we've got this big image right here. And we're going to do something different with this bar. We did a pink bar in the frozen yogurt one that was set apart a little bit. And this one is kind of connected to the image. So we're going to do a little bit different styling. There are different ways to do this too. I'm going to show you one trick, but there are multiple ways that you can get something like this with this effect. Okay, so don't worry about this bar just yet. Let's move on to this portion right here. We've got another heading. Let's go ahead and do an H2 on this one. Then we've got a paragraph. Then I've got these 2 parts right here that look identical. Let's go ahead and add those into a section. So you'll have an open section with an image and then a smaller heading. So let's do an H3 on that one. Then you'll close the section. Then you do that same thing over here. Open a section, put in that second image, put in another H3, and then close the section. Remember, stop the video anytime you need to catch up with your code. Okay, this last portion over here, I don't want to put this one in a section because it's not the same width and it doesn't have the same meaning as these right here. This belongs to the main part of the page, but this is kind of set aside. So we're going to actually use an aside for this one. And that will have an H3 in it. Actually, let's do an H2 because that is a little bit bigger, but it's about that size. So let's do an H2. And then an unordered list. Okay, then you'll close the aside. Then you should have closing main. Let's go ahead and add the footer next. That should come after you close main. And you just have one paragraph inside of the footer. Okay, so take a minute, go ahead and add in the rest of your code. And then I will share mine so that you can compare and make sure that you've got everything. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen so you can see my HTML for this. Okay, obviously you start with the doc type. And then I'm going to have an open HTML, open head. I have a title, and then I've already got my link in here for my external style sheet. You can add that in the next step. Then I've got open body, got header. Inside of the header, I have nav tags. Inside of the nav, I have an unordered list with those 6 list items. Close the nav, close, sorry, not close, open a div for that second portion with the H1. Then we're going to close the header. Then I've got a main. There's that first image, that big one. The H2 down underneath it. I've got a paragraph, and that paragraph text is on Schoology, so you can just copy and paste it. Then I have a section with an image, and oh, it looks like I used an H4. You can use H3 or H4, whichever one you'd like. And then I've got a section and an image and an H4. Sorry about that. I'll just ignore the intercom. Okay, then an aside, then an H3 here, an unordered list with those list items. Close the aside, close the main, open footer. Only thing in here is a paragraph. Then we close footer, close body, close HTML. Okay, if you need to pause or go back in that video, that's totally fine. Just make sure that you have those elements. Now, headings, those headings, if you have a different thing in there, like if you've got 2 H2s and H3s where I have an H2 and H3 and H4, that's totally fine. Remember, this is 90 to 95% exact, but not 100%. You want to get just practice in encoding more than, that's more important than having exactly what I have, okay? All right, so we're gonna go ahead and stop that share. And we're gonna go back to our screenshot here and start styling. We're gonna do this just like we've done the other ones. I'm gonna write up as much as I can on the board. And then at the end, I will go through and show you. Okay, so let's start with the outermost element, body. You can see that this isn't just a solid color. It has a little bit of a texture to it. And if you were paying attention when you downloaded images from Schoology, one of those says, I think it's background body or something like that. So that yellow image will tile. It's got kind of a seamless edge to it so that it looks like it's just expanding. That's kind of a nice one. So you're going to add in that background image to body. Okay, now I'm just going to leave that blank just in case you renamed that file when you downloaded it, or if you put it in an images folder, it's going to look different than mine. So just make sure that you use that file name. And since you've downloaded it, you should be able to just start typing it and brackets will fill it in for you. Okay, one other thing that we had on body, a note on Schoology, was the font type. So I'm just going to go back to Schoology to remind you of that. And we've got text and it just says serif font. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and use serif. So let's go back to this. So font dash family. And I'm just going to put serif. And remember, these are things that you can change if you want to. If you feel like it needs to be something a little bit different, that's totally fine. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and close that up. Next inside the body is the header. Remember, that's going to go 100% wide. And we need to have a background color on that one also. We're going to use the white. So let's add in code for the header. Okay. And on this one, we may need to add a height. Or actually, no, we don't have anything floated in this, so we won't have to worry about that one just yet because we're using a background color. We'll check it and see. For now, just start with background color. Okay, and then we can come back to that if we need to have a height. Okay, and we don't have to have a second rule. Remember, we can just come back up and add another rule here and keep that the same. Okay, moving on, inside of header is nav. So that's where that purple background is going to come from. The hex code is on Schoology. Okay, so you'll have that in your code also. And just go ahead and copy and paste that in. All right, I'm going to erase this and we'll go on to the unordered list. Okay, that unordered list is a block element. So in order for it to align with everything else, we need to center it. So we need to know what width. We need those three properties: width, margin left auto, and margin right auto. So just like the frozen yogurt one, I have given you a cheat right here. Everything is aligned with this image. So go back to this one and see what the width is. And then we'll put that in as the width for the unordered list. And chances are it's 960. You shouldn't say chances are, that's what it said at, but that's a recurring theme. It's just a little bit easy to follow. So unordered list width 960 and margin left auto, margin right auto. Okay, and I realize that that's just a little bit off the screen, so I'm going to erase it just so you can see that better. And hopefully slightly better. Okay, so that's with the unordered list. So that will move the list over here so that it aligns up with this also, or it will shortly because we haven't aligned this one either. Next, we have list items in here that need to go horizontal instead of vertical. So, but let's wait on this one. We have two lists in our page right now. So we've got this one up here and this one down here. The default behavior for those list items is going to be, actually, hang on just a second. Let's roll back just a little bit more. We also have two unordered lists, not just sets of list items. So this right here, I can't use UL as the selector. So sorry, back up just a tad. So I'm going to create a class for that one instead. And just assume that that goes before the curly brace. I'm just doing it on top so you can still see it in the screen. I'm going to create a class for this UL right here so that it will center, but I don't want this one to center down here. Okay, so in your HTML, we're going to go back to, I'm sorry, I think I forgot to tell you to create the CSS. Hopefully you've done that step, creating a CSS and then linking it in the head. If you didn't, I apologize. Take a second, go back and do that if you didn't. I've already got several of the stylings for you. So just make sure that you have created Science Club CSS or .css, and then in the head of your HTML, link to it. Okay, so all of these now are in the CSS, all these styling rules. I'm sorry if you started doing it inline or internal, but please do it in an external. Take a second if you need to pause the video. Otherwise, let's go on to this unordered list. So if I'm going to create a class in the CSS, now I need to link it in the CSS or in the HTML, excuse me, so that they are connected. So up here, this unordered list needs to say unordered list class equals, and then I just made it up to say top UL. Yours can say whatever it needs to. UL class equals top UL. So for this one right here, not this one down here. This one can keep its default behavior. So we don't need to do anything with that one. It's this one that needs to change. Okay. Now the list items in here also need to change. So again, we're going to need to create a class. And the reason why we put it on this one and not this one is because this one will already behave just like this. If we don't do anything to it, it will look like this. But this one is the one that we need to change. So let's create a class for these list items. Okay, I'm going to call it .navlist. You can call it whatever you want. Remember, no spaces in that name. And then let's add some properties. So first of all, we know it's horizontal. So display inline. Oh, excuse me. Okay, so display inline will take all of those items and move them horizontal. They're going to be all squished together, so we need some padding around that. And we can experiment a little bit. I'm just going to look at this for a second. I don't know that I want it all the way around because that takes up most of the space. And this one over here looks like it's aligned pretty closely with the left. So why don't we actually do padding dash right so that it only puts padding in between these. And let's start with 20px. We can change it if we need to. Now we need to change the text color because it's white, it should be default black. So let's go ahead and add color white. Okay. That should be enough. Well, remember, I will go ahead and show you mine later on. If it doesn't look quite right, look at your spacing or maybe your font size. I have these all in caps too. So you can use that text-transform property to make all of them appear in all caps. If you didn't type them in all caps already, that's okay. All right, so now we need to put that inside of each of the list item tags in HTML. So it helps when we're creating classes like this to just go back and forth so we don't forget. Go back to your HTML. These list items only, not the ones down here. And we're going to add that class in. So in the LI tag, class equals nav underscore list. You'll need to put that class into every one of the list items. So remember, there's 6 of them. You can just write it once and copy and paste. Okay, but all of those list items are going to need that. All right, let's go on to the next line. Okay, so this div down here, we can see that it is also lined up with this image. So the div, that's the only div that we have in here. So we can use div as the selector, and we need to center it with this one. So it needs to also have a width of 960, margin left auto, margin right auto. Okay, so that will then move this H1, not centered. We don't want it to text align center. So we don't want it appearing right here. We want it lined up here. So we move the div. So the div takes up this much space, but then that H1 is still left aligned. So it appears at the far side. So the H1 does need to have a different color. That's one of the pink colors on Schoology. I believe it's the, I gotta remember if it's dark pink, I think. Anyway, let's just double check really quick then. So that you get the right one. Yeah, let's go ahead and do the pink. Okay, we'll have the dark pink as that bar underneath the image. So just do the pink hex code for the H1. All right, moving down, the next thing down from the header, so all those things are within the header. Next thing we've got is the main section. We can see that that is centered. A couple other things that we can note too is that it's got a background color here of white. So let's add those in for main. Okay. We'll go ahead and go to that point. So main then, once you save and preview, it should shift everything then into the center. Even if it's not all the way aligned like this, that's okay. We'll get to it. But then you should see the background on either side quite a bit. Okay. All right, now we've got an image here. We want this pink bar to go underneath it. I'm going to do it as a border. That way there's no space in between. If I put it as a div or something else, I might need to mess with the padding and margins, and that's kind of a pain. So if I do it as a bottom border, it will be exactly up underneath it. So I'm going to create a class for this one because I don't want that to appear on these two images, just on this one. So I'm just going to call this main image. Okay, and we're going to give it border bottom. And let's see, size, that's pretty tall. Let's go with maybe 40 px. We can adjust it up or down if we need to. And it's solid. And then just grab from Schoology the dark pink hex code right there. Okay, and I think that's all that we'll need for that one. Make sure you come back then to your HTML, find this image. And let's put that class in there. And then you'll have the source, of course, after that. Remember, no dot here, the dot only goes in your CSS. Okay, now these down here, let's see, we had this as an H2. That is a purple color. And so is the paragraph right here. So we could, looks like all of the text inside of main is that purple color. So you can go back to the CSS for main and you can just put the property color with that purple hex code. Okay. Next, let's go to, let's see, this paragraph right here is indented, but it's not centered. Looks like maybe this is centered within main. The text is not centered though. So remember, if we have a text element that's also a block element, there's two different ways that we can center it. So let's create a class for this paragraph. And I'm just going to call it main para. And we're going to give it a width. We know that this width is 960 that we're going off of. We want just a little bit of space on either side though. So somewhere between 850 and maybe 900 px. Okay. So this will go in your CSS, then you're going to go back to your HTML and add in that class to this paragraph right here. So find this one. And you'll have paragraph and then class equals main para. All right. So far so good. This one looks like there is a little bit of space, maybe a left padding or left margin. Would add that in there on the H2. So you can go ahead and add that in for spacing if you would like. Let's go on to this section. Okay. So we know that this is 960. These take up quite a bit of space, and then this one's a little bit smaller. So maybe we want to take, maybe we want an overall width of about 700, maybe a little bit less. Let's do 700 between these two. That's a nice even number. And then we'll have 260 for this one. So 700 for these two divided by 2, 350. So 350, 350, 260. So then you'll have that difference in width. Okay, so let's code this section. All right, so we want the overall width to be 350, but we do want some space in between. So let's make it, you can actually look at the width of this image if you want and see what that width is, and then give it spacing on either side. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to switch to my HTML so that I can see the exact width. So going up to, I've got 280 for 280 wide, which you can see right here. Here's my section. There's that first image, width of 280. So if we're making these 350 total, do some quick math here. So 280, so 350 minus 280, that would put 70 pixels on either side. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a width of 280. And we can just say padding. Let's do padding left. And what did I say? So that's 70. So we want 35 px. And padding right. Okay, another way that we could write that, if we wanted space above, we could do 35 all around also, which would be that statement right there. Then we'd have 35 on either side and top and bottom. You decide which one looks best. Then we've got the image and then that heading. So the headings we know are going to be centered, and rather than change or add another rule, because the headings are inside of the section, we can put the text align center in this one, and then both of them will have that applied to it. Okay. Forgot one thing. We need to float these left to each other. Okay, now we can end. We've got the width in, we've got our padding. So telling it to float left will mean that this section right here and this section will be next to each other. That should take care of those portions. Now let's go on to the aside. Remember, we're using 700 total. We have a 960 overall width. So that gives us 260 for the aside total width. So let's do the aside. We're also going to float that left so that it goes up in alignment here. And if we have 260, we do want a little bit of padding on either side again. So let's do width of 220. And remember, you can adjust up or down if you need to. I will show you my exact code so you can look at it later. So 220, we want an overall of 260. So that gives us 20 on either side. So we can do padding of 20. That'll also give us 20 on the top or the bottom. Okay, then we have this heading and this list, which we didn't do any kind of styling on the list. We only adjusted this up here. So this one should be just the same. All right, now if you've saved and previewed, you've probably noticed that that white background doesn't show now. Maybe it did before, but now it's not. Let's go back to our floats and columns lesson and just review that when we have floated items, actually it probably cuts off right here, doesn't it? These are floated, so they get taken out of the normal flow of the HTML. So we have to use that, that property overflow wherever the background color is being applied. So go back to main, to the rules that you have set up for main, and just add a new rule that is overflow hidden. Okay, and you'll just put that into main. Right, then you should see that white background appear underneath and go all the way to the end. So we're almost done. We just need to style this footer. Okay, so we know that our footer has a background color right here, and it's going to be the light yellow that is on Schoology. So we'll go ahead and add that in. I'm sorry if my marker is getting a little bit light. Hopefully you can see, and remember, I am going to show you my code at the end, so you'll be able to see it much better. So our background color, and then we have this one paragraph inside, so we can do a text align center on that one. And then the paragraph will have that applied to it. Let's also add a height and maybe some padding to this so that there's a little bit of space and it's not quite so tight there. So I'm going to add a height. Start with 40px, and then you can go up or down from there. And let's do just padding of, let's say 15px. Okay, and I may not have the exact ones. I don't have the code right in front of me. So if some of my numbers are off just a little bit too, just keep that in mind. We want something that's close. Okay, so that should be all of the styling for this. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my style code, and you can look through it. You can pause if you need to and just double check with what you have. Okay, switching to my CSS. Okay, so first of all, I've got the background image set on body, and then the color that applies the text color to the elements in the page. Then I've got header. And I've also added a margin top of 0. If it's not exactly up at the top, you can do that to see if you can get rid of the space. And then I've got a background set as white and height at 100%. If your height is not working out quite right, I think on some of them we actually gave it a height, but it just depends. Let's see how it's acting. Okay, then onto the nav. And we've got that background that is the purple color. I've got a height of 60px. If you need to add that in, that's okay. And then I've also specified width as 100%. You may or may not need that. Just see what yours actually does. Okay, and then I've got the unordered list. centered. So I've got a width of 960, margin left auto, margin right auto. And then I do have some padding on that. That just gives it a little bit of space above and below. So you're welcome to add something like that in. If you feel like yours is okay, that's totally fine. Now I did something a little bit different, so please ignore what I've got here. I've got header nav ULLI. That means the list item inside of the UL, inside of the nav, inside of the header. Okay, that's one way to do it. We just did a class so that it would be a lot more simple. And we also did a class on the UL, where I just have UL on this one. So just keep that in mind. Some of mine may be a little bit different than what I'm telling you, but don't stress, okay? As long as it looks pretty close. So we've got the display inline, color white, padding right. I did put the font family on here and transformed it and then made the font size a little bit bigger. Okay, then the div, I did not put, didn't put a class or anything on this one, and we just used div because there was only one div on the page. So this also means the div inside of the header, just in case we were to have a div somewhere else, but we don't in this case. So there's just centering, so width, margin, left and right auto. Okay, I've got an H1 with that color. I've changed the font size to make it bigger. The main, I've got width, margin left and right auto, background color, and overflow hidden. That overflow hidden is really key to make sure that the color does come through. Okay, then I do have the main image. I've got display block on here, but you probably don't need that where you've centered the main. The image is that exact width, so it should also center with it. If not, go ahead and add those in there to center it, but you shouldn't need that. Okay, then there's that border bottom. Give it the dark pink color. All right, so on my section, I've got a width, margin, and I think on our example, we did padding. Padding and margin in this case are going to give you the same result. It only makes a difference if you're using a background color or a border, which one you use. So if you're just trying to get white space on either side, margin or padding will do it. Okay, footer. Oh, we didn't cover this. In case you need this, if your footer goes up to the right side, we covered this in the frozen yogurt one, but if your footer you see it up on the right next to the helpful links or something like that, remember to add this property clear both, and that will force it down to a new line. Okay, and then I've got some styling for the paragraph that's inside of the footer. You may or may not need that. Oh, that's because there is a different color in there. You could also put that inside of footer, either one. And then I've got this is the paragraph within main. So I have a different width on it and some margins. And I did it a little bit differently, but remember, these are just to get it pretty close. And I might use percentages. I might put them into a one-line statement, means the same thing as margin left auto, margin right auto. Okay, then we've got our aside floating with a width. In H2, I've given it some padding to force it over. And then I've done a text line on the H4, which we did put in this section when we went over it all together. So you don't need it in that one. I apparently on my code didn't put it in this section. So as you can see, there's several different ways that we can do this. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm contradicting myself. They achieve the same thing. Okay, so putting the text align center in H4 is the same as putting it in this section. All right. Okay, so your code should look fairly similar. Your preview should look similar to this one. That is the Science Club practice page.